Hi guys, yes, lift us up a tiny bit, thank you. Yes, I'm here to talk about leachate. First things first, let's talk about substitutions. Is that working? This is Matthew Hobley. And he was supposed to be giving this presentation. He's one of our waste engineers. He heads up the our East Coast Waste Infrastructure team and based in our Brisbane office with Kartik. And he's not here today, and I'm here. And I can tell you that if I was on Mastermind, leachate would not be my specialist topic. But we've got a presentation prepared and we'll work our way through it. So what we're going to touch on today, guys, what is leachate? I think we all know that. That'll be pretty quick. How do we model it to understand, what we need to manage? We'll look at different treatment options. Of course, leachate to sewer is something that's been used internationally here in Australia. We are looking at the idea that, untreated leachate to sewer, which we'll discuss. And really, like a lot of the other guys were saying, and my fellow presenters, is really just planning for the future to make sure when we are going to be looking after leachate, we're making smart decisions along the way. So what is leachate? We touched on it. Basically water that gets in contact with waste or also where waste has been held. Of course, waste is wet and we try to dry it out, so we're not paying gate fees on water as much as we can. But also too, rainwater, and some people might have some very special sites that have soggy bottoms, as we like to call them. And groundwater is touching the leachate, touching the water too, touching the waste, and therefore generating more. Multiple sources or locations of generation across the site. Obviously, a key one that people also got to be mindful of is on your ponds as well. When rainwater falls on top of it, you're going to be just generating more and more leachate. And of course, it's got various contaminants of concern, and PFAS being the one really on the high in the agenda of late. Water balance, obviously, make sure you get one done, guys. You can only manage what you can measure. And of course, the New South Wales guidelines give some plenty of guidance on how to actually do that. And of course, for lower facilities, smaller facilities, less than 20,000 tonnes, there's default values. Beyond that, you got to be looking at the health model. So hydrological evaluation of landfill performance, more detailed analysis really on what we think is going to be generated. First things first, we don't want it, so let's try and minimise generating it. So obviously, a key part of it, as Kate touched on, was the capping side of things. But even going back to the very early days, is planning for your stormwater and leachate management requirements from day dot of your facility. Optimising landfill cells designs. It's great. You go to a client and go, look at this cell I built. It's 10 years of void space. Well, it's 10 years of leachate generation. So be very smart about how you're actually designing your leachates, your cells. Including, particularly in some wet areas that we've worked in cyclonic areas, basically trying to build cells every 2 to 3 years, just so you're minimising the amount of area that's actually open and exposed and going to generate your leachate. And progressive capping. So really, ideally, the landfill's heading in one direction. You're building your new cell, you're capping off the old one, and you're constantly working. So you're trying to minimise the amount of open space. And of course, intermediate cover or intermediate capping or cover, don't underestimate the importance of that in it. But regardless, even the driest part of Australia, you're still going to have leachate. And of course, I'm from Ireland, you may have guessed that. Leachate, a very wet part of the world, and a lot of leachate there. So I'll speak about more on that. And of course, we have to deal with it. So we've got to be planning for it from early stages. Infrastructure. So look, it varies across Australia, it varies internationally too. But of course, came to Australia for the sunshine, it's there. Evaporation is definitely an option, but we will talk the difference between evaporation and storage. Ponds, mister systems, various things, heating it just to assist with the evaporation. Other areas where evaporation is not going to work, and even sites that are maybe constrained. You might be thinking about farms for storage, and of course there is disposal options then through to sewer sewer treatment plants or wastewater treatment plants, and of course some pre-treatment options, and also irrigation and recirculation, which we'll touch on all of them as we kind of go through the presentation. As we said, Australia, large landmass, broken into 5 classifications in relation to climate, and obviously your leachate solutions need to be tailored to your particular location in relation to generation and also treatment. Evaporation. So obviously, as I said, a lot of people move to Australia for the sunshine. We should try to use it in relation to get rid of our leachate where we can. Of course, in some areas it's not suitable, but a lot of the places it is, which we'll touch on as we go through. but be very mindful too of the significant changes across the seasons in relation to evaporation. So in Coughs here, summer we're having up to half a metre, but then in winter it's only 200 mils. So we've got to be very mindful of that. If you look at the evaporation side of things in a little bit more detail, I just want to touch about how we design leachate ponds, or as I should say, the team designs leachate ponds. I do not do that. As I said, plan early and do it once, do it right, really. Yes, still working. Obviously, we've got to define our inputs, so using the help model or other tools, we need to determine how much we're going to generate, and then also outputs, how we're going to get rid of it. What is actually the approach there? And particularly being conservative with that approach is very important, because with the leachate side of things, you want to do it once, you want to do it right, so you don't have operational headaches as you go. Obviously, you've got to think about the average, 50 percentile, but also what's going to happen in the wet events, right? Also, what's going to happen on a monthly basis, because it will change, as we said, the evaporation rates and even the downfalls, the rainfall was going to change over the year. Think about that seasonal trends, but also over multiple years as well. The New South Wales guideline says, 1 in 25 storm event for 24 hours. That's the minimum. But of course, in cyclonic areas where we've worked in many locations, particularly in the west, we've designed some systems, 1 in 100 storm events, 72 hours, so longer duration, much bigger events. And of course, we've got to think about the pan factor in relation when it comes to evaporation. And New South Wales 0.7. WA doesn't have any guidance, but of course, BEPN, Vic BEPN has 0.8. So it does vary around the world about how that works, and we'll just chat about that, as I said, shortly. A key one, as we said, guys, is making sure we're planning for multiple years, and particularly with the, New South Wales has had some wet years of late, nearly make me homesick, the weather over here at the moment. But as we see here, we go out, meet a client, oh yeah, I'm all sorted with leachate, yeah, we got storage capacity there, oh, it's over a 2-year time frame. Okay, but what happens over a longer term time frame in relation to will you have capacity? So the graphs we're showing here, the first year is at very large storm events, and then it's just averages. But you can see over 2 years you're okay, but actually over 5 years you're going to get yourself in trouble. You don't have enough capacity on site to actually hold this leachate. So it's very important we are looking at that longer term time frame. Also, too, is, if the pond's not available or you haven't got enough capacity, what else can you do? So tanks, or sometimes even holding in a landfill, mindful of that, saying that to the regulator, but anyway. So we've obviously got to be mindful of that. So having that longer approach is very important in relation to the modelling works we do for determining infrastructure. We spoke about previously on the evaporation rates across Australia. The graph on the side, obviously, the graph here we can see, oh, I've got a point there. This is just a GIS tool that we've developed, obviously getting some bomb data. And this is probably where we generally start with our clients straight away once they come in. So depending where in Australia we can see in the summer, yeah, we can have plenty of evaporation across the country. But in the winter time, you can see, no, we actually don't. So all the white stuff here, we're actually not getting any evaporation. So really indicates Victoria into, New South Wales in there, it's just not going to work. Also, the main thing we've got to be mindful of is that different areas have different microclimates. So here, actually, in relation to Coffs Harbour, we can see actually in the summer, we don't have any evaporation, but in the winter we do. So be very, very mindful of your settings and plan accordingly. As we spoke about that pan evaporation rate, so because when you do build a pond, and that is the treatment option you're going for, or even if you do have a pond just for storage, the pan factor, which is 0.7, means actually that would be further reduced. So as you can see here, this is the winter again. So we actually can see we're getting more and more white areas here. So very important that we obviously take that longer term view. And also, too, in relation to the changing climate we have at the moment, very important we're conservative in our approach to doing that. Talking about ponds, so I don't think I've been to a landfill, well, actually probably one or two very small ones that have no infrastructure for leachate at all, but whether you're using evaporation or just storage, you're going to have a pond. So very important that we actually think when we actually are looking at designing these facilities. So location is key, particularly if we're trying to encourage as much evaporation as possible. So not in the bottom of a hill, but, sorry, at the top of the hill, not in the bottom of a valley or something like that, so minimising the amount of actually sunlight that can get in there, and wind too. Be very mindful of whether your where your pond is supposed to be for evaporation or storage, because the designs are very, very different. Storage, so many sites we've worked on, we have big storage ponds, should I say, small surface area as deep as we can get them. But then on the side we have large, very shallow evaporation ponds. So when we are pumping the leachate in there, it can heat up nice and quick and we can get rid of it. So very mindful that we're thinking about how we actually are designing our ponds. And realistically, if you are looking for evaporation, it should be ponds. Irrigation or circulation. So irrigation, yes, it's an option that's been used here in Australia. It's the first time I've seen it. It's actually the first time I've ever seen a snake in the wild in Australia, my first year in Australia. I was scared by boat, I could tell you, because coming from Ireland, irrigation of leachate is just no. So obviously there's some untreated and also treated irrigated leachate nowadays. But you've got to also be very careful about how you're doing that. So obviously not in the winter and the high rainfall events. And if you are, you've got to have a very stringent monitoring regime to make sure you're not having undue downstream impacts in relation to irrigation. Irrigation is a treatment method because you are going to get rid of it, while recirculation is not. You're just basically moving around your site. So it is an option you can use if required, particularly if you've got a large events and high leachate generation event. But you are just moving around, so be very mindful of it. But also, too, be very careful how you do it, because a lot of people say, oh, yeah, we just irrigate or we just recirculate. Also has to be controlled, because you're wetting the waste mass also, or saturating it in some instances, or also even your soils or your cover or your cap. You kind of have stability issues, which is evident from this picture, which is actually a site in New South Wales. So there was a slip of the cap. So again, definitely options you can use as required. But again, tread carefully. Think about it. Make sure you're doing it in a controlled manner. Disposal to sewer, something that was very common with, obviously, when we use from sewer, either generally wastewater treatment plant, but either through sewer or to tankering. Other parts of the world, really, it's tankering to a wastewater treatment plant. So to sewer, a common practice here, but what we are, and there's licenses and permits that have been obtained in the past. And of course, some of it is just currently untreated leachate. But we have seen from our experience, particularly in New South Wales and the Northern Rivers regions, that, and actually in the South Coast, that there has been pushback from the regulators in relation to permitting this. And that has been a big game changer for many of our clients or landfill operators. So it's a significant change, and generally a change that haven't necessarily planned for, unfortunately. And that means that we have to think and reconsider what our options are. Obviously, pushing towards, if we are going to sewer or wastewater treatment plant, is the pre-treatment. And I've been talking to many people here at the conference about pre-treatment options, and there's plenty of people who have far more experience and knowledge of those than I am, but there is a range of them that you can use. And realistically, it depends really on your site location, your concentrations, what's in your leachate, even the volume you have, and also what you're trying to do with it. So there's a variety of options there, which I've listed up there: biological, physical, or even chemical treatment. But most of the sites that we're seeing is, it's an integrated approach. Some technologies will do certain things, other technologies will do other ones. So you need to look, as I said, what your requirements are, understand them, and engage with these technology firms and seeing what's best fit for you guys. But what it is doing, it's having significant cost implications for landfill operators, and as I said, generally unplanned. So, and really increasing the gate fees associated with your landfill. The other one that we touched on, and even some of my fellow presenters touched on, is obviously just these extreme weather events. We're having more and more of them. It's getting wetter and wetter, and we're having big events too, as in big downfalls. So it is coming, and we're seeing more of them more frequently. Actually, even talking to the guys, 1 in 10 events. 1 in 10 year events are happening so much more than actually not even 1 in 10 year events anymore. So just really be taking that conservatism in it, but also not just on the design, but in relation to contingency, as in, are the pumps even suitable or large enough to pump out that volume of water from your leachate or from your ponds and so on and so forth? Is a freeboard enough? So really just emphasising the point when you are designing not only your leachate system, but your surface water system, which Kate touched on, is that conservative approach nowadays with our changing climate is really important. Key takeaways, guys. Look, just to summarise what I touched on is get a water balance done. Obviously, it's absolutely critical. You can only manage what you can measure, and be conservative in that approach. Be smart on your site design, particularly when you're setting up. We've been lucky enough to start. We've been involved in projects that we're actually starting from day one, site selection studies, design, approvals, all the way through, and it's great. And you can really see how you can, being smart in your design, is minimising your risks and your operational issues and challenges later on. And of course, leachate is the main thing we're trying to avoid in relation to landfill engineering. So being really smart on that. If you got the sun, use it. We've got plenty of clients in Western Australia where there's plenty of sunshine, and really those clients shouldn't have leachate issues because we got so much sun we can get rid of it. So just making sure we are recognising it, but of course that's not going to be suitable for everyone. As I said, more and more scrutiny on that untreated leachate to sewer. So that's where we've got to be looking at those pre-treatment options, which is basically, from my view of the world, my experience in Ireland and the UK, that's where that's what has to happen, and that's what's regulated elsewhere in the world, and I think you'll see it more and more coming into Australia. But that pre-treatment is set unplanned, and that is increasing the cost, your operational and your capital costs associated with your landfills. So make sure we're planning ahead as much as possible. If you currently have untreated leachate going to sewer, I'd say think about it, because you might be able to do that for too long. But also too, it's not just necessarily just thinking about your leachate treatment plan. It's also, does this change mean that we are altering our residual waste strategy? So really, if we have a landfill, do we really need a landfill? Is there other options we can use our residual waste? So obviously been involved in some big waste energy contracts in the West. I do believe they will come here more and more. It is an option for you to get rid of it. Let's do that. Or can you give it to someone else? If you've got a small little landfill, do you really have to operate there yourself, or can you give that to someone else? Do you have to go it alone? So if you have to build a facility, do you have to go it alone, or can you do a regional approach which then spreads your costs, your operational costs across multiple facilities? So really, in relation to leachate, big changes there happening, really needs careful consideration, but don't be afraid to go back to the start and actually consider, is landfilling by myself at this landfill site the right approach in relation to your council? And that's my presentation.